most important information about the Syrian conflict?
Oh man, this is a hard one because Syria is one of these wars where Iraq and Afghanistan, again, I was a kid for, where this one, there are so many things that have driven me crazy about this war. But I guess the Kurdish issue versus the mythical moderates, and this is who the U.S. is backing in Syria. And so Scott has a lot of great information on the Timber Sycamore program in the book and how the U.S. was backing the, quote unquote, mythical moderates, or the moderates, what they call the Free Syrian Army, which was really just, maybe there were a couple people who weren't extremists, but, they were joining up or had their weapons taken from them by Al-Qaeda in Iraq that had moved over to Syria. The group led by al-Jawlani, who was the follower of Zawahiri, right? These are hardcore jihadists that the U.S. was backing in Syria. And even in 2012, then Director of National Intelligence, Michael Flynn, signed off on a memo that said that this program ran the risk of creating an Islamic caliphate in Syria and Western Iraq. And that's, of course, exactly what happened. And so, the U.S. carries out this massive multi-billion-dollar program years and years and years until 2017, when Trump finally shuts it off. Of course, this is run by the ogre John Brennan, who spent the first few years of his time, he was involved in the Bush torture program, ends up being, I call him Obama's ogre because he kept him in the basement running the drone program, picking drone targets for the first few years in the administration, then becomes CIA director and runs this Timber Sycamore program. Army and backing on these jihadists in Syria. We'll talk about Libya later, but a lot of these jihadists and the weapons that the jihadists got come from Libya. A lot of them are veterans of the Iraq War who fought against the United States, killed Americans in the Iraq War, right? These are the people that the United States is now arming and backing in Syria, all because, the slogan Assad must go. So, of course, this blows up into the Islamic State, and now we have another idea. We're going to start arming and backing the Syrian Kurds. And so, especially around, I think 2014 and 2015, 2016, there's a lot of stories about how the Pentagon-backed Kurds are fighting against the CIA-backed jihadists and these crazy kind of things. And so then it got so bad. There's this area in northern Syria, kind of along the border with Turkey, 20 or 30 miles into Syria. And there's two towns. One's Al-Bab and the other one is Manbij. And I can't remember exactly which side controlled which, but the U.S. Army Rangers and Special Forces were driving their Humvees with big American flags. So they put, giant poles with giant American flags on the back and would drive between these two towns, where on one side there's American CIA-backed jihadists and on the other side Pentagon-backed Syrian Kurds, which, everybody likes to pretend like the Syrian Kurds are like the, Westerners of the Middle East. It's just not true. They had their own problems, carry out war crimes. And then, right now, conscripting 15-year-old girls to go fight the Islamic State for them. So, yeah, these people aren't like Democrats or anything like that, right? But, we're having to drive American forces between the two sides. And apparently those Humvees were coming under fire and everything like that because the American bad sides in Syria hated each other so much. And, this isn't, I guess, the most important part of the whole Syrian war. We could talk about the chemical weapons attacks and the false flags there, and Trump bombing Assad, the OPCW and the American influence. But just, I guess, as far as the Syrian war goes, the part that I just can't help but talk about is how the Americans have no sensible policy whatsoever. If it's Iraq, we back the Shia militias. If it's Syria, we bomb the Shia militias, even though the Shia militias were fighting the Islamic State on both sides of the Iraq and Syria border, which the Islamic State erased. And so it made no sense. We're backing the Kurds, but they're fighting the Sunnis that we're also backing. We're backing the Kurds, but our NATO ally Turkey is bombing them. The whole thing is absolutely insane and makes absolutely no sense. And it's all was initially started on the policy that we have to remove Assad from power because he's some kind of bad guy. But really, Obama revealed the truth in his interview with Jeffrey Goldberg when he said it's about taking Iran down a peg, right? Like it was never really about Assad. It was about removing Iran's ally in Syria, which happened to be Assad. But the result of this war, look, when Assad's back was against the wall and ISIS was advancing on Damascus, where they were going to carry out a genocide against the Alawites and the ethnic minorities of Syria, the Syrians called on Assad, on the Iranians, and the Iranians organized Shia militias and helped to, along with the Russians, turn back the advance of the Islamic State in Syria. And so, what result did that have? Iran has far more power and influence in the Middle East, particularly Iraq and Syria, than they ever had before, because these were the people that turned back the Islamic State. It's going to, I'm sure, be like a World War II Germany narrative where in the United States, we defeated the Nazis, but everybody, else in the world knows the truth that like the Soviets did like the bulk of the work, right? We're going to pretend like it was us that, it was the Americans that defeated the Islamic State, but really it was Assad and Iran and Russia.
Was Soleimani someone who played an important factor in fighting against the Islamic State?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where, like, I think Soleimani was popular in Iran previously, but became largely popular in the Middle East. And, on the second anniversary of his assassination, just a couple weeks ago, there were attacks against American forces in Syria, Iraq. The Houthis stole a UAE boat off the coast of Yemen. Because Soleimani was such an important figure in resisting what the Americans were trying to do in the Middle East, including leading to the rise of ISIS, and feeling like that ISIS was the lesser of two evils versus Assad. And at times, even if ISIS was crossing open desert, if they were moving towards Assad's positions, we had the opportunity to bomb them. We didn't because we wanted ISIS to do more damage to Assad and all that. And so, Soleimani was very important in organizing the resistance to ISIS, particularly on the ground from the Shia militias. And so if you're an Alawite, a Druze, Shia that lives in the Middle East, I'm sure you feel somewhat grateful to Soleimani, because had the other side won this war, you would be dead or displaced from your home. Like, why? Like, I've talked to special operations forces who are on the ground in Syria. The things that they told me that ISIS did to people who are refused to convert. I mean, we see some of the videos that they showed online and all that. They're absolutely horrific. But some of the things they did to people who refused just to convert, right? Like, you're the wrong kind of Muslim for the Islamic State, and so you're gonna die is kind of the situation, right? And so the fact that Soleimani and the Iranians turned them back is absolutely huge. I will mention that on the Iraqi side, it wasn't just Soleimani. There's another guy, al-Mohandes, who was also assassinated along with Soleimani, and his death is also very significant for the Shia militias in Iraq. One more thing on the cruelty of the Islamic State, and I think this ties into the things I was saying with the prisons and that the U.S. was running in Iraq earlier. One of the things that the Islamic State really did is they replicated what the United States did to people, dressing them in orange jumpsuits, putting them in stress positions, and I don't know about waterboarding, but different things that the Americans did to torture people in Guantanamo Bay and black sites around the world. The Islamic State did that to their Western captives, while they held territory. So, like, James Foley and all those people, suffered that way in part because of what Dick Cheney and George Bush did to other innocent Muslims.
And any other information you have on either of the very flimsy evidence-based chemical attacks, one under Biden and one under Trump, if I remember correctly.
One under Obama,
Biden.
and two under Trump.
I'm sorry.
So
I get the two mixed up.
Yeah. So the first one, 2013, Eastern Ghouta, there is a sarin chemicals weapons attack that kills, I think, between like 600 and 1,500 people, depending on whose numbers you're reading. Initially, this is blamed on the Syrian government. Later, there is a really good report by Theodore Postal, who works at MIT, a literal rocket scientist, who goes and shows that because of where this rocket landed, we know that it could have, fired from X range to X range, right? You could look at a rocket and you could see that like it could only fly so far. And so then you could draw like a circle and say like, well, it was fired from inside this range. And it turns out all that range was territory held by the Syrian opposition. And so it's very clear that Assad did not carry out that attack. Now, that attack did have important consequences because, even though we know that Theodore Postal debunked it, it took a long time to happen. And it's not accepted in the mainstream media, really. You know what I mean? If you're on CNN, you could say Assad carried out chemical weapons attacks in Eastern Ghouta, and nobody's going to question it, right? So Obama had drawn a red line, whatever the hell that means, on chemical weapons, saying that, well, if Assad uses chemical weapons, I'm going to do something about it. And so this happened, and everybody was saying, oh, Obama, you got to do something because Assad used chemical weapons, even though that wasn't true. Obama was living in a reality that it was true. And so Putin helped negotiate a deal with Assad to take and destroy all of Syria's chemical weapons. And, Will Porter, the co-host of my show, a great dude, like one of my best friends, Will Porter, has done an excellent job, reading all the OPCW reports, including the ones in Arabic, contacting the OPCW, and essentially ensuring that the OPCW was comfortable that there were no chemical weapons in Syria, and that there were a couple sites where I guess they left a few things, but it was more a result of it, just because conflict was going on. You don't want to move chemical weapons through Damascus if there's a possibility that like a mortar could hit the truck, right? And so these kind of, I guess, were some of the decisions going on. In fact, Trump bombed one of the sites that the OPCW had said that, they hadn't fully cleared or something like that. But anyways, as Ray McGovern always says, Putin essentially pulled Obama's chestnuts out of the fire here, because Obama was in a position where he essentially had put his back against the wall, saying that he would go to war with Assad, but nobody wanted to do that in the United States. And so by Putin orchestrating this deal, it got the chemical weapons out of Syria. Now then, this next one, Khan Sheikhoun, is in 2017, and there was a little like concrete building in Khan Sheikhoun, Syria, that was hit with a Syrian airstrike that the Russians notified the Americans of before the airstrike was carried out. Syria says, and I think it's the case, that it was a conventional weapon that they used, and the strike hit a meeting of al-Qaeda leadership. What happened afterwards is underneath so one of the ways that al-Qaeda, when they have territory, they control the population, is they control all the vital resources. And in a war zone, that's not just food. It's food, it's medicine, it's cleaning supplies, so bleach, pneumonia, it's fertilizer, and some of it is phosphorus based, it's weapons, explosives, and all of that. So when the strike hits the building, apparently all that is in the basement. And there's good reporting by Seymour Hersh on this at the London Review of Books. And they look at the places where the alleged rockets hit versus, where this building was, and, the wind direction and everything like that. And it's pretty clear that what happened here was that people did die from whatever substances were released from that burning building. But at the same time, that isn't like they dropped a sarin bomb on Khan Sheikhoun, or I think even intentionally did this. Again, the Americans were notified of the strike. And then the third major one was Douma in 2019. This is an area outside of Damascus. Initially, it's reported that it was sarin. There's no evidence at all anywhere any soil samples, anything that sarin was used in Duma at all. No proof of that. Now they allege that it was a chlorine attack, and that's because in a war zone, there's bleach, right, in different places. You're disinfecting things in different places, and so they find bleach or chlorine in the soil. It's not clear that the soil samples that were taken, that there was any kind of weaponized chlorine. All they find are traces of chlorine. So again, it could have been bleach or any kind of household cleaner in some soil. They also have a couple canisters that they say, one landed on a bed, one landed in a building, and they have a whole bunch of dead bodies. Right. But none of the actual evidence. And Aaron Mate, who writes at the Gray Zone and on his own Substack, has done the absolute best work on this, explaining how basically what happens is that there's a lot of bombing going on in Duma because this is an area held by the Syrian opposition, and snipers and other militants are carrying out mortar strikes into the rest of downtown Damascus from Duma. So, the Syrian government is trying to retake this territory. It's held by a Saudi-backed group that's a Salafist group. It's not ISIS maybe, but they're certainly very, very far right conservative Islamist, right? And they're fighting against the Syrian government, and they're carrying out heavy bombing. And so it's very dusty, and people start showing up to the hospital not being able to breathe really well. Some guy comes out and starts yelling, gas, 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 gas. And so everybody just goes into mode and starts treating it like you would gas, because you just dump water on people. It's like, a low cost kind of thing. And that pretty much is where the whole story stems from. And so, it's a little bit different, where 2013 was an actual false flag. 2017 is a distorted narrative. And this one is just an invented story. The best evidence they have is the CNN lady sniffing the backpack going, it smells like bleach to me, which is absolutely nothing. Here's some chemical weapons. Please put your face into it and sniff it. And that's what the CNN lady does. So all the chemical weapons attached were fakes, are not actually carried out by Assad.
Are you familiar with the current National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, sending an email to the Clinton campaign about AQ? Can you explain that email briefly, just to finish off the Syria discussion?
We're probably going back to 2011, 2012 here when Sullivan sends this email, and I think we get it from maybe the WikiLeaks or maybe the Leopold releases. But, this is from Hillary Clinton's emails, and one of her advisors is the current National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. And he says, AQ is on our side in this one, boss, referring to the Syrian war. And in fact, afterwards, Hillary Clinton gives an interview where she talks about the fact that, it's really hard to back Assad in Syria because Al-Qaeda is fighting against Assad, and do we want to take Al-Qaeda's side in this fight? And, that is what the Americans were doing in Syria. But yeah, even the Hillary Clinton emails absolutely show that's the case. Again, you have the Clinton emails, you have Flynn's DIA memo, and also once he becomes Secretary of State after Clinton, John Kerry is on a couple of recorded calls where he's talking about how the United States flooded Syria with weapons, and all it did is help the Islamic State. And I forgot the other one I was going to mention, but basically Kerry was he was talking about how the United States thought that they could control ISIS and lead to the chaotic collapse of